In this video, we're going to be continuing to look at Agile, and we're going to be trying to compare between the more traditional waterfall approach and these new Agile type approaches that we're going to be using in this module. Okay. You should hopefully be familiar with Waterfall and the way that it works. We've got this very kind of linear sequence that we try and follow anytime that a Waterfall project is happening. So we start off with this idea of planning the project, we then design the things that we're wanting to do, we build it, we test it, and then finally we deploy it. Okay? There's this lengthy process of requirement collection and analysis that's documented in big beefy binders that's then handed over to the design team that take these, turn them into amazing mock-ups, passed on to a project manager who then looks through them and ticks many boxes and then sends it on to the developers to build stuff. Waterfall is good, but it's designed for projects that have clear, unambiguous, well understood requirements that aren't really likely to change. Okay. These are all tracked through well-defined milestones through gates, and then designs can be signed off, code reviewed, and moved on. It's very easy to monitor the progress of a waterfall type project. Okay. The challenge is that not all projects are like this, and waterfall does have a number of different limitations. The first of these is that the total time required to complete the project is the sum of the times required to complete each phase. So projects that are on a short schedule are likely to suffer unless you have some kind of strategies in place, okay? Because you can't move on to the next phase until you've done everything previously. There's no provisions of going back. You aren't able to then say, well, okay, let's have a look at this first thing, and then halfway through this first thing we can move on. No, you have to do this first thing and then move back. And if you actually get to this stage of, well, we've got this bit of software made and the user doesn't like it, you then need to go back to this first stage again. So it can take a lot of time to get a very, very good working bit of software. And one thing that you might notice with this is that the test phase is actually quite far down the list. So the first time that a user is going to see the product that you've created for them is in the fourth step, maybe even in the fifth step in the deploy stage. So it can create significant challenges in actually responding to changes that happen. Which is why Waterfall works really well in some areas, but for areas with fast-moving requirements, it's not going to work as well. Agile is a little bit different. Agile projects are suited more when the scope of the project is expected to evolve and there's really a lack of a clear view about what the final product is going to be or what the expectations of the customer are at the beginning. This is particularly true anytime that a project is undergoing these cycles of rapidly changing requirements. And this is why we've got something that looks a little bit more like this thing here. So we have a small plan, and then we've got this iterative phase where we design something, we build something, we test it. And then we've got another phase where we kind of launch this tiny little deployment and then do another plan, iterative phase of design, build, test, deploy, and we continue to go around this circle again and again. So plan, design, build, test, plan, design, build, test. Using this method helps us respond a little bit better to changing requirements, and it helps us to actually kind of respond to customers that don't really know what they want in the first instance. So one of the things that we need to think about in terms of how Agile projects are designed as opposed to waterfall projects is how we can actually use some common characteristics in them. The first thing to think about is the amount of time that's spent in each of these time box periods, so these design, plan, and build, or design, build, test phases. Normally, these are between 1 and 4 weeks, so we've got a good amount of time to actually think about specific elements of the project, work on them, and then send these back to the customer. We take our customer's software requirements and we break them down into something that's called user stories. We're going to cover user stories in a lot of depth in this module because they're a very good way of actually trying to understand why a particular requirement gives value and who it gives value to. These user stories are prioritized, and like we do with most of our requirement specifications, we figure out which ones are the most important and the order in which we're going to be working on these. Okay, the team not the customer, is going to be the one that decides on what things are done in what order and the overall release timeline for things. So how long is it going to do or going to take for each of the different elements to come out? Before each of these iterative kind of steps, the team decides how many of the different stories they're going to try and work on, how much time they think each of these is going to take, and then figuring out, based on that team's capacity at that moment in time, the exact ones that they're going to be looking at. At the end of each of these things, the team will give a review to start to try and figure out, well, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do next time. Compare that to the waterfall approach, where we've got these kind of big things leading on one from the next, jumping from team to team to team. This is completely different, a lot better at actually starting to understand how these things work together. And this picture here does a really good job of actually showing, well, how do we start this iterative loop? So we can see on the far left-hand side, we've got this idea of the product vision. This comes from the customer. The customer is the one that says, I've got this really good idea. I want a bit of software that can do this. We take that vision, we break it down into a number of different requirements or user stories, and we store these inside of our product backlog. Okay, this is just a list of all of the different things that we want to get done. Then what we do is we think, well, how many release points are we going to have in order to get all of these things working together? Okay, what different things are we going to try and release at different points along the project? What are we going to release at the end of January, February, March? Once we've decided that, we can look at each of these individual releases and figure out the exact things that we're going to be trying to do. Okay, we'll do that maybe at the start of every month. Okay, in our case, we'll be doing it at the start of every week for your coursework. We figure out the exact things we're going to work on, and then we start to work through these. We have daily meetings, we call them daily stand-ups, and we use these as a way for every person in our group to talk about the things that they've been working on, the challenges that they've been facing, and what help they need going forward. And at the end of our month, after our kind of time box period, we then meet with the customer and we say, these are all of the things that we've done. Here are the increments that we've actually managed to do compared to last time. What do you think? And then they can give us some comments and feedback on that, and then this whole process starts again. So Agile is very, very different from the way that traditional software development works. But Agile isn't just this one thing. It's more of a set of ideas, and it can be split into a number of different tribes or flavors of Agile. This can include Kanban, Lean, Extreme Programming, Scrum, DevOps, Product Management. And all of these things have a number of different areas inside of them. This map here is something that was taken from the Agile Alliance website. And it does a fairly good job of showing you the different sorts of areas that different Agile flavors, or they call them tribes, actually contain. So for example, if we were to follow the extreme programming line, which goes all the way along the middle, we can see that there are things like iterative development, daily meetings, sustainable pace, simple design. All of these things are key inside of extreme programming. If we look at Scrum, we'll see that we've got things like the definition of ready or the definition of done, okay? Relative estimation, how we can actually start to understand the amount of time it takes to do one task compared to the other tasks that we're working on. Burn down charts, ways that we can actually start to use very simple documentation to look at how a team is performing. So we can use a combination of all of these different skills, all of these different ideas as ways to start to develop the way that we work as Agile teams. So, when do we use Agile and when do we use Waterfall? Well, there's a number of different ways that we can think about this. This is called Stacey's Matrix. It's named after Ralph Stacey, who was a British organizational theorist. And it's got 4 different areas. If we look at the 2 axes on this first, we've got the idea of technology. So do we know the type of technology that we're going to be using? So close to certainty would be, yes, we know that we are going to be developing a very simple web application that uses just HTML and just CSS, maybe chucking some Bootstrap to make it look nice, but the technology is very easy and I'm very comfortable in using it. Far from certain could be something that we're not overly comfortable with. So we're going to be using a node stack. We're going to be using the most recent version of Angular, but because we like pain, we're going to try and include some different things on top of that as well. And just for fun, we're going to be making it as a PWA. Okay, some of that might be a little bit uncertain. The requirements, the what, can also change. They can go from close to agreement, so I want a very simple website that contains my CV, a picture of me, and a picture of my cat, through to far from agreement, which is I want an entire blog system made for the entire university that satisfies everyone on campus. Okay, there are these bits, and then we can think about the different areas inside of this. So simple, so close to agreement in terms of the requirements and in terms of the technology we want to use, so we know what we're using. This is probably where Waterfall is going to be the best technology to use. Complicated, so kind of having a rough idea about technology and a rough idea about requirements. This is where Agile is well suited. You could probably get away with using Waterfall here, but Agile would work here a little bit better. Think 5-year vision type project. Okay, this complex area in the middle, either when you have far from certain technology or far from agreement in terms of your requirements, is where Agile thrives. Okay, if you are far from certain in terms of the technology that you're using and you're far from agreement in terms of what you're going to be doing, you're kind of in this anarchy zone in the top corner. And here, just leave. Really, this is the areas where the project is probably going to fail. There have been a number of different projects that have happened in the past where project managers have just said, we need to stop this because this project is not going to succeed, because we are way too away from agreement in terms of what we need to do and how we're going to be doing it. Okay, so benefits of Agile over Waterfall. Well, one of the big benefits of Agile is that you're actually doing this incremental delivery. You're giving these benefits to the customer early. Okay, a customer doesn't need to wait 9 months in order to get their new website up and running. They can release it within the month, and then they can have small increments. Customers of your customer can then give them feedback, which can feed back to you, and you can start to build up the value. They can start to make money from the product a lot faster. Reduces the cost of making a change. So think about the waterfall approach of going down those steps. You're not showing something to the customer until you're getting to the very end. If they don't like it, it needs to get passed back to the requirements gathering, design, creation. That doesn't happen inside of Agile. You're speeding up the delivery. You're focusing on this idea of eliminating waste. Things that don't have to be done just are not done. And then you're generating value for the user very quickly. Okay, you're only making sure that you're giving them aspects that will give them a very big return on investment first. Okay, so they're able to get out there and start to earn money from the things that you're making them from a very early stage. Agile does have some limitations. It's not something that I would recommend for every single project. One of the main limitations in Agile is this idea of, well, you're telling me that you don't know what you're going to deliver, you don't know when you're going to deliver it, and you can't tell me how long the project is going to last. Goodbye. So it's worth bearing in mind that it's not perfect. Okay, it can be very difficult to estimate how long a project is going to take. Okay, it can be hard for new people to join in the team because your team is such a close-knit selection of individuals. And this lower emphasis on documentation, some people take that to mean there is no documentation. I remember doing projects in the past and thinking, well, I'm going to take an Agile approach, which means no documentation. It's not true. You still need to have some documentation along the way. Okay, people still need to be able to see what it is that you're doing. It can also lead to kind of decisions by instinct rather than decisions by analysis. So this idea of working quickly can mean that you're just doing things instead of thinking about them first. So these are things that you need to think about. They can be intense as well. Agile teams, there is the possibility inside of an Agile team to forget that the outside world exists and to just continue working because you think, I have to get all of this done. And that normally happens at the start of Agile projects when you haven't really figured out what your burn down rate is for a team yet. You haven't figured out how much work you think you'll be able to do in a week. And unfortunately, Agile does work best with sophisticated tools. So one of the challenges inside of Agile teams is because we're saying that there isn't an emphasis on documentation, we rely on software to do quite a lot of that documentation for us. So you are going to have to become familiar with tools such as GitHub, pull requests, using test-driven development, all of these different things that could be challenging to learn in the first instance, but once you've got them under your belt, it can help you in actually being a very active member of an Agile team. So when we're comparing between traditional projects and Agile projects, we can think about them in terms of the fixed factors, and we can think about them in terms of the variable factors that exist. In terms of the fixed factors of traditional projects, well, the features are fixed. These are the things that have to get done. Okay. In terms of an Agile project, well, the resources are fixed. This is the amount of money you have, and the schedule is fixed. We will be releasing at 1 month intervals. The variable factors are different. Okay, inside of a traditional project, the variable factors are the resources, so we might be able to get more money to do things, and the schedule, which can kind of go backwards or forwards. In an Agile project, the variable factor is the features. You may or may not get this thing. Okay. Inside of this, you can call traditional projects more plan-driven. The idea here is that these projects are really designed to be followed or follow a plan. You will get these certain things and you'll get them by this date. If something goes wrong, we can adjust the date that you're going to get it from or the amount of money that you need to give us. Inside of an Agile project, it's more based on value, okay? So we have X amount of money and we know that we'll be delivering at these points. Let's focus on the things that are going to give you value first, get them out there, and then depending on how much money or time we have left, we'll focus on everything else, okay? Two very different approaches. You can probably see that they have different ways that they can work inside of projects, and different projects respond differently to them. Some will work better with Agile, some will work better with a traditional waterfall type approach. So we can think about them in terms of the amount of focus and where that focus is. So inside of Waterfall, the focus is on the processes, the tools, the best practice. With Agile, the focus is really on the individuals, you, the team members. We can think about it in terms of the scope of the work that has to get done. So inside of a waterfall project, the scope, time, and cost are our three main constraints. Those are our golden triangle. The scope is agreed, and then the time and the cost are then worked on after that. In terms of Agile, we think about our iterations that we're going to be doing. We use these to start to determine what things we're going to be delivering, what things are going to be giving us the best return on investment. We can then think about what's going to happen when things change. In terms of traditional projects, you'll probably have to fill out a change management plan. You'll need to focus on going through a big change management process, filling in lots of forms, whereas Agile is really designed to just kind of go with the flow. If a change is going to happen, let's go for it. And then finally, thinking about architecture and design. Well, architecture and design are thought of in the very first instance within traditional projects. We always look at these things and say, okay, well, here's our design and planning stage. Inside of an Agile project, these things are more fluid, and these kind of emerge throughout collaboration with the project owner. So there are other parts as well. We can also think about it in terms of planning. So how are you going to be planning out the project? You can think about it in terms of the delivery of the project as well. So in terms of a traditional project, the customer is probably only going to get to see things at the end, whereas with Agile, they get to see them in these incremental jumps throughout the project, which can be quite beneficial. Alternatively, we can think about it in terms of documentation. Some customers like to see the documentation as they go along, as opposed to seeing the finished result. These kind of things would fit in better with a traditional project, whereas with an Agile project, the emphasis is actually on the working code. Okay, remember that value from the Agile Manifesto: working code over documentation. Okay. And then finally, we can think about the team sizes. In terms of waterfall projects, team sizes can be large and can be graphically or geographically distributed. Inside of Agile, we have our teams being very small, normally between 6 and 8 people. And this is the size we're going to be aiming for in terms of this module as well. And we find that groups of this size work best together and provide the best results. So that is a very quick overview of comparing between waterfall and comparing between Agile. Hopefully you'll be able to see that these two things are two complementary methods. One is not better than the other in general. One might be better than the other for given situations, but it really depends on what it is you're going to be creating. And in actual fact, some projects, for example honours projects, I feel that they work really well in taking a waterfall type approach for semester 1 and an Agile type approach for semester 2, because in semester 1 we know what it is you've got to do. You need to figure out what you want your project to be about, we need to get your requirements written, we need to know what you're going to be doing. In semester 2 you're going to be doing it. So semester 1 worked really well with his waterfall approach where we've got these set deliverables. Semester 2 works well for the Agile approach, where we know that we've got these time boxes that we need to fill, and we know that we've got this big list of features that we're going to get done, but we're probably not going to get them all done. So let's focus on the high ROI ones first, and then use that as a way to do your project. In this module, we're going to be focusing specifically on Agile as opposed to Waterfall, and hopefully you'll see that you can use a number of different Agile practices to make your life a little bit easier. The next set of videos are going to focus on different flavors of Agile and how you might be able to use these different things inside of your development practice.